Hey guys, welcome back. Today we are going to be looking at the best YouTube export settings from within Premiere Pro. So if you're looking for the best settings to export your video to YouTube, especially when it comes to 4K videos, we're going to walk through that today. So as you can see here, I have some footage here all edited. I'll play a little bit for you. This is some footage I took in a recent trip to Alaska, and we're going to use this as our example. So, pretty landscapes, and as you can see, it's a very complicated edit, what I've done here. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump in. You can go up to File, Export Media, or you could use the shortcut Control-M on your keyboard. And when this opens up here, if this is the first time you're ever seeing this window here, just a quick overview. The left-hand side here is the preview window. This is where you can scrub through that exact edit that I just showed you, and it is just the in and out points, so the start and end of footage. You'll want to make sure that everything looks good here before you go on to all the settings over here. So starting at the top, the format. YouTube actually accepts quite a few different formats in the year 2020, but the most compatible format, or the one that if they had to pin them down to say just one format, they would recommend H.264. There's lots of other ones in the list here. I will have links in the description of all of the formats that they accept for YouTube uploads, but for the purpose of this tutorial, we're just going to be looking at H.264. For the preset, it kind of doesn't matter in this instance because we're going to be customizing this a little bit, but if you want to ensure that we're going to start with something that matches your source, we are going to use the match source and might as well make it the high bit rate. We're going to be changing most of it, so it doesn't really matter. Also, don't forget to point your save location to one that is where you want to save it. All right, moving on down, you'll just want to take a quick look here that your output and your source match up, as in you have the proper resolution in both and the proper frame rate in both. You can check that here, or you can check that in this window down here. In my case, this is 4K GoPro footage filmed at 60 FPS, or in technical terms, 59.94. Heading on down here, we don't need to worry about too many of these settings here until we get down to the bitrate and advanced settings. So the bitrate encoding, there's a couple different options here. One is CBR, which stands for constant bitrate, and the other is VBR, which stands for variable bitrate, 1 pass and 2 pass. And all this means is the bit rate that it is going to encode at may change over the duration of the encoding and exporting process, but for the most part it's going to stick around in a flow, and the constant one, well, is just that, constant. It's going to try and stick exactly on that line. The 1 pass means it's going to do this all in one shot and take a look at the footage only one time, and the 2 pass, well, you guessed it, is going to take 2 passes at the footage, and as well, you can probably guess that this will take not twice as long, but it will take an extra amount of time to take a look at this footage and possibly catch any things it missed from an encoding perspective in the first pass. I think for platforms like YouTube and stuff that's going to be heavily compressed once you upload it to it again, it's probably not needed for, I don't personally use 2 pass, so 1 pass is just fine, so I prefer the VBR 1 pass. So that remains unchanged. Now, the target bitrate, and they use the word target because we're using VBR, it is going to try and hit whatever bitrate you're suggesting or setting here, but it's obviously not going to hit that the whole time, but it's going to be sort of like a guideline marker for this. YouTube also has some recommendations on target bit rates that you should have for various uploads to YouTube. Also, I'll have a link to that page officially from YouTube down below in the description. But what YouTube recommends for 4K video that is under 30 frames per second, it recommends a bitrate between 35 and 45. So if we split the difference here, let's just call that 40. And if you watch down here, estimated file size, I'll set that back. It was at 15, we changed this to 40, it goes up to 61. So quite a jump, and you can see that is how much quality we're adding to the target export of this video. Now for videos that are above 30 frames per second and all the way up to 60, which is the max that YouTube accepts on their platform, and in my case this is a 60 FPS video, they recommend somewhere between 50 and 70 Mbps. So split the difference there, we'll call this 60, and you'll see this jump up again to 92. Now, I know what you may be thinking on this slider, well, why don't we just do this? And the reason is this bit rate is only as good as the footage that you're trying to export. There's a bit of a saying, garbage in, garbage out. If you are putting up, low quality 360p webcam footage, you can't throw this slider up and make that webcam footage any better than it was when it was imported into your editing software. Really, this target bitrate is supposed to find a balance between how good your image was and how compressed you want your image to be for final export and upload, because on the other side, you want to have someone who's going to watch your video who may be on a slower internet connection to still be able to watch your video even at the different quality standards. So it is a bit of a fine balance, and I would always recommend staying within YouTube's recommendation scale, because if you do go higher than that, their upload servers will actually more aggressively compress your video to make sure that it conforms to their standards, and that could have adverse effects on your video. So for this one here, because it is a 4K 60 FPS video, I'm going to be sticking around the 60 mark here. Okay, so the next one here is the keyframe distance. This one is kind of my secret sauce, and this is one that will ensure you have the best overall quality of your video. And so you may be asking, what is keyframe distance? So what keyframe distance is, if we take a look here at the starting of this river clip, the keyframe distance is the difference between the frames when it's rendering out the video. So video is just a series of pictures, and when we're talking about this video here, it is 60 frames per second. So every second, the camera was taking 60 pictures. It's quite a bit when you talk about a video that's even 12 seconds long. You multiply that out. But when it's rendering out, it's actually looking at the scene, and although 1 second can lapse on the monitor here, which is just that small little bit of pan, the amount of time some of these rocks stayed in the same place as repeated pictures were being taken was actually quite a lot. And this keyframe distance is going to take a look at, let's say, this rock here in the image, and when it starts rendering, it's going to go, okay, gray rock, some speckle down at the bottom, okay. Then 72 frames later, it's going to check again if this rock is still in the frame and go, okay, gray rock, speckles here. That's going to be its next reference point. If we were to check this on and set this to a number like 8, it is then going to wait only 8 frames before checking in again to see if this rock still looks like it did when it sort of referenced it, in the very first frame. For this shot, it's probably not too big of a deal because we don't have too many dynamic things happening, like different lighting coming across or people walking across the frame and things like that. But if you have a scene where maybe lighting is changing throughout, or the look of some textures on objects are changing, this is a really great setting to be able to force your computer to render out this shot with more attention to detail, or more attention to detail more often is probably the better way to put it. It will, if you notice here when I click off, it doesn't actually change the size of our file, but it will increase your render time a little bit. So if you do have limited CPU power on your computer, it will tax it a little bit more, but it's worth it in the long run because it will ensure that everything is exactly how it looked out of camera. So You could go as drastic as saying every one frame, you want to check every single frame, but again, that will have a more adverse effect on your CPU performance. So I would probably set it maybe somewhere around 8 or 9, just, something that's not 72, but something that's not on the other extreme, like 1. And then the last one, it's already checked here, but is normally unchecked, is just use max render quality. Says gives better scaling, but increases encode time. It's probably a better thing to check rather than not check, and you're probably talking only about a few more seconds in render for this here to ensure that you have the maximum quality. So that is it. Those are all the tips that I have for exporting a video, especially a 4K video to YouTube. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any other questions about exporting, or if you want to see any other tutorials related to exporting, or any other tutorials in general. So that's it, guys. Thank you very much. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.